Good morning, everybody. If it makes any difference to you, Paul, I didn't know anything more than what you did about Google Analytics about 2 years ago. But I have the blessing of working for our marketing agency, which I heard about earlier today. And marketing agencies need to report analytics with much scrutiny and much accuracy, as many of you guys know. And that's really fun, and also really challenging sometimes, especially when you get into AMP. So like I said, I'm Chris Luke. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Johnson Group. We're an ad agency in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's a small town there. We do everything from Super Bowl commercials to billboards to everything in between, web design. And as the Chief Technology Officer, obviously, I'm most focused on our digital efforts. And more importantly, maximizing the bang for your buck of our clients' marketing dollars month over month, year over year, because we all know how important that is to them. And for the most part, most of our work in the digital side compromises going to landing pages. So we place a lot of digital ads between all of our clients every single day, and they all lead to some sort of landing pages. And we know that relevant landing pages increase your conversions. So it's good to say you can get the best burritos ever. Click here. It's better to say you can get the best burritos catered for your wedding in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that increases your conversions. So what I'll be talking about today, and these landing pages that you're going to be seeing, is about a company called US Express. They're a transportation company. However, most of these principles can be applied to any industry because a landing page is a landing page is a landing page. You're trying to get clicks. You're trying to convert. But as a little point of reference, the transportation industry is a little unique as a whole. These are people that are driving the semi-trucks. And the demand has gone up every single year for these drivers because we love to order things online. We love to get it delivered straight to our door. And generally, that means someone has to drive it there to us. And so the demand is really high. It's going up every single year, but the amount of people that are coming into this industry and becoming drivers has remained consistent over the past couple of years, so it's highly competitive. Some of our clients pay up to $500 per driver application. So that's basically $500 a conversion if you think about it. So it's highly competitive, and we always have to get better, and we use data, obviously, to get better at that. Back to the landing pages. Over the past 2 years, we've iterated on them constantly, and I'm sure all of you guys are very familiar with this process. You're moving a picture here, you're adding contrast there, you're changing your headline, you're tweaking it all around, and ever trying to increase your conversion rate by just 1% or 2%. However, and through all these efforts, tracking. So because we work in a marketing agency, you get many stakeholders. You get your marketing team, their stakeholders. They want to know how everything is tracking. You've got your ad buying team who have their own metrics, and they want to know how everything is tracking. You've got your clients who want to track everything through third-party softwares and everything in between. And there's a whole gamut of tracking demands when you work at a marketing agency, as I'm sure lots of you guys are aware. But we got pretty good at it. So as we got a little more sophisticated on our data, we added custom dimensions and metrics, and generally started to get smarter about understanding who our audience was and how they were using these pages and engaging. Probably not surprising for most of us in this room, we found that our audience, these truck drivers, were connecting via the mobile device almost 80% and connecting on 3G. So they were connecting at rest stops and gas stations, generally looking for their next job as a truck driver on a slower internet connection. So it's taking that knowledge, taking that sort of understanding of the industry and my audience and who these landing pages were being directed to, I vividly remember sitting there and looking at all this data and always wondering, how do I convert more? I can move pictures around. I can put a pretty face up there. There's so much I can do, but how do I really make a difference to my clients? And lo and behold, about a year ago, the first time I ever saw Google I/O, Paul stood up there and said, AMP is the answer to my problems. And I was very excited about that. One of the other interesting things that maybe a lot of you guys are experiencing is I come from a relatively small ad agency. So I have a small amount of developers between me and one other full-time salary developer and a couple freelancers. We're responsible to do all of this. And unlike many large enterprises that have the staff to demand best practices and really focus on the nitty-gritty, we don't. And so AMP was a solution because no matter what, if it validates, it's going to be fast, it's going to be good for our mobile users. So we really wanted to do it. And that was a solution. AMP was a solution, but we were left with the question, to AMP or not to AMP? And that was our question. which probably many of you have either had that question in your mind before, had that question in your mind today, and that's why you're here, or considering it now after watching some of these wonderful presentations. We wanted to reap all the benefits that AMP had to offer, but we wanted to ensure that our tracking remained accurate and insightful because we report to all those different stakeholders. So I sat down and identified what my absolutely essential KPIs were. And for us and a lot of other industries, the essential ones basically take up these ones: sessions, users, clicks, time on page, and for us it's calls and applications, which probably talk about a lot of you guys. But we use third-party software for calls and applications, so I won't be talking about that today. So let's rewind a little bit back. Remember when tracking was complicated? When you had to launch Google Analytics and literally get into your analytics.js and put all the different things you want in there and get it all into your database and make sure that everything was coded correctly and tracking accurately? I don't, because I wasn't there back then. I never had to do that work. Today, over the past few years, tracking implementation and tag management has become much easier through the use of Google Tag Manager. With this, we can just install one simple script and do everything from a web interface pretty much. And that's great. But AMP, just like Google Analytics was back in the day, and just like GTM was just a couple years ago, is new. And so it's not as mature, it's not as fleshed out, and so we have to do a little bit more work to get the same analytics that we are able to do very easily using a web interface today with other Google products. So as I go through this, I'm going to be talking about the different ways that you can enter into an AMP page and kind of the tracking problems, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that poses. These are the 4 ways. The first way is Google Search, Proxy Cache, Direct, AMP, and non-AMP. And I'm going to go into those a little bit more detail here. This is probably the most common way that someone is entering your AMP page. It's through the Google Search AMP viewer after accessing the page via organic search. The problem is that when you load this page and you're resolving to google.com, your analytics tracking script will not fire. This would create a new session. And if the user clicks through to a non-AMP or your AMP content hosted on our site, a new session and user will be created. That's a problem. Basically, I end up with 2 sessions, 2 users, and everything is duplicated. But I'm one person. I've gone here and I've searched my query. I'm looking at a page and I think it looks good, so I click back into the site. But suddenly, my metrics are reporting 2 users, 2 sessions, but it's one person. Probably the most common problem. The next one is via the proxy cache, and it's pretty rare. Users may access your content from the proxy cache on cdn.ampproject.org, in which a completely unique client ID would be created as well. So same problem here, although it's pretty rare that someone will actually be able to have that exact URL. They'd have to dig pretty deep to get that. The third one is when an AMP page is visited directly on the publisher domain. An AMP client ID is generated and will be used across AMP and non-AMP pages. And so we see this most commonly if people have saved your page as a bookmark or are sharing it with a friend and are getting to your AMP page directly, not via some sort of organic search. And finally, when a non-AMP page is visited directly on a publisher's domain, a normal client ID is generated and will be used across AMP or non-AMP pages. Now, that all means a lot of different things, but let me clear it up. If a user accesses content through any, like 3 of those 4 scenarios, suddenly, like I said, we've ended up with 3 client IDs to 1 user. And that can really, stew your data up. As you can see, our users and our sessions went up a large proportion after we started piloting AMP. And that was really bad for us because we do everything by conversion rate. And if you're doing your conversion rate by sessions versus clicks, and you got double your sessions but no more clicks, you look like AMP is not doing great for you, and that's a bad thing. Luckily for us, it wasn't that AMP was doing bad for us. It was just that we had our analytics set up a little incorrectly, and I'm here to clear that up for you today. So the solution is actually fairly simple. It's the AMP Client ID API, and it's relatively new. It's really new, and still being iterated on, still being worked on. But it solves that problem of all the different ways that you can enter into your site, getting different users, different sessions, and things of that nature. With some minor additions to your AMP and non-AMP tracking code, Google Analytics will start using a single client ID on Google Search, direct AMP, and non-AMP scenarios. It's really cool. After implementation, a user who accesses your content across Google AMP Viewer and all these things will have one user. And let me show you what that looks like. So the format of the client ID will depend on whether you entered into an AMP or a non-AMP page. And it will stay consistent across the rest of their journey through your site, whether it is AMP or non-AMP. And you can see here, because the user entered in via an AMP page, that client ID starts with AMP. And we'll get into that a little bit later. It provides some pretty cool insights. The other way that they can get into it is they access a non-AMP page or navigate to an AMP page. A standard GA client ID will be used. And so you can see here, we've got GA. Sometimes it's numbers, sometimes it's letters. But very definitively, if you enter in on an AMP page, you will have an AMP client ID. So this is a scenario that's happening. And if you implement client ID, it will take whatever client ID you were generated. So if you were generated and you came into the site via the home page here, and you came in, and this is not an AMP page, you would get a Google Analytics client ID. However, and if you moved into one of my AMP pages, that ID would follow you. However, if you found me on Google and got into one of my AMP landing pages, you would have an AMP client ID. And if you moved into the rest of my site or moved throughout, you would keep that same AMP client ID. The official API documentation outlines setting up Google Analytics and Tag Manager. We have set ours up using Google Analytics and analytics.js. We didn't use GTM for this implementation, but it is possible. You can find additional vendors who have built-in configurations for AMP Analytics component. You'll need to refer to their specific documentation to set up the tracking of client ID. Currently, client ID is supported with Google Analytics, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier today, but if you work with another analytics solution like Adobe Analytics or Facebook perhaps, you'll need to work with them directly and the AMP community to kind of get client ID supported by them. But it works great for Google Analytics. First thing, now back to implementing, and it's much easier than we think it is. First, you need to include this line of code in the head of all your AMP pages. And we're declaring that we're using Google Analytics, and we're using Google Client ID API. Not too bad. Next, you want to add this additional piece to the standard GA create request on non-AMP pages. I see a lot of people taking pictures. That's good. Normally, and where this gets confusing, and I think where a lot of us are having trouble is because we've never had to write a Google Analytics script, really. Because we go into Google Analytics and we say, give me my script, and we copy and paste in the head, and we never look at it again, none of us have ever really had to go in and make custom code changes. And the only change here, use AMP client ID, true. Pretty easy, right? Finally, is to add a referral exclusion for cdn.ampproject.org in order to ignore self-referrals from cached AMP pages in order to preserve the original source medium information associated with the first touch upon a user navigating a subsequent page on your site. That's a lot of words to basically say, if you're delivering AMP pages via AdWords or some other ad server, we don't want ampproject.org to show up in our Google Analytics as a referrer. We want the referrer to actually show up what it was. So we set up that exclusion. After that, you're done. And that's pretty easy, right? Except for the fact that we're not so great at testing as developers, which is why I've included how to test afterwards. So you're going to want to test it. After you've got those lines of code set up, you're going to want to navigate to an AMP page in Google Search in Chrome with the emulator set to mobile. Make sure you're in a new incognito window and click on an AMP page. Check your cookies and copy your GA cookie. So you can see, in my test, I've navigated to the AMP page. I've got the AMP client ID there. And the next step, I'm going to try and go to a non-AMP page. So next, you want to navigate to a non-AMP page on your domain and check to see if the cookie matches. If it does, you succeeded. Then you can say you're done. And then you said, I've tested, I'm a great developer, my boss loves me because I never push through errors, and it's great. But once you have this, some really cool things happen. After implementing the Client ID API, Google Analytics now treats all three of these users as one. And that's really great. One of the major concerns with AMP pages is now resolved, and I'm pretty sure that it would solve most of your concerns. But this is track all the things, so we're going to get a little more advanced with our trackability. Implementation of just this was pretty straightforward with the Google-provided documentation. Metrics that are directly impacted by this use is session duration, bounce rate, pages per session, user count, and type. We now have a much more accurate reflection of our users' behavior across all of our content. And to give you an example of what that looks like, so if someone was coming into our AMP pages and then they were going from our AMP landing pages into the rest of our non-AMP regular site, we were seeing a very high bounce rate because it was seeing one user came in and then they left because it didn't understand that that same user was going into the rest of my site. So we saw a really high bounce rate. That's no good. We saw a really high exit rate. That's no good. We saw really high sessions, which we've already talked about. But it solves most of those problems. But AMP Analytics provides powerful tools to track a wide variety of user interactions. And in the following sections, we will cover how to fire events based on button clicks, as well as some other types of events that are supported. Adding an event in AMP Analytics requires using a trigger, sending a request with a type event, defining a selector, and adding, at minimum, values for the required event category and action fields. Here's a portion of the script we use to track button clicks. So here we have the trigger set to click, the selector, which we have named click track, and the request is event. And then we've labeled our category button clicks. And this is pretty basic, but you can do dynamic button click tracking, which I'll get into next. It also allows you to pass dynamic values into your events by adding an additional element selector. The prefix is data vars, and we've chosen to call ours event ID. You can format for what it looks like. You can see the format for how it looks like above. And so basically what we're doing is I'm passing a numerical value into each button on my landing pages in an order of 1 to whatever, 10. And what I use that information for is to understand which button is being clicked on each page. And so number 1 represents our top level button. Number 2 is probably our hero, and it goes all the way down. But I'm able to dynamically pass those values and see it reflected in analytics. Other things that I could dynamically pass into these event button clicks would be things like maybe template name. If you want to get crazy, you could do headline copy if you're getting into that A/B testing. Anything that you're dynamically wanting to understand on each landing page, you can pass using AMP Analytics. Now you can see our event action is passing dynamic values from the HTML we added to our button clicks. Dynamic values can be passed this way into event category, action, and label fields, which is great. I only talked about button clicks, but the syntax in writing it is pretty common and pretty simple for the rest of them. You can find them all on ampproject.org, these triggers, but there are some other common ones like visible, scroll, timer, and initial load. Generally, in my conversations with other marketing teams and other people that are investigating AMP, we haven't been able to find a trigger that hasn't worked for our analytics solution yet. So it's all there, ampproject.org. Sending custom dimensions in AMP Analytics is a bit different than universal analytics, but follows the same concepts. Custom dimensions can be sent with page view requests, event requests, or with all requests. And since we are in the business of tracking all the things, you're going to see me applying these dimensions to all the things. We've chosen to send a custom dimension of customer client ID with all requests, which I'll walk through now. Here we have created a custom dimension to send the Google Analytics client ID to help with session stitching and analyzing user flow. We have chosen to call this custom dimension customer client ID as to avoid any potential conflict with standard client ID reporting in Google Analytics. Maybe this doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but it will. It gets really cool. So step 2 is to configure your AMP Analytics script to send the custom dimension. We have decided to send this dimension with all triggers. So we have defined it above in our page view and event triggers. This is the script that we have implemented on our AMP pages. Step 3. In order to tie this together completely, we need to push the client ID with page view requests on non-AMP pages as well. You can see how we've accessed the client ID and sent it along with page view requests as a custom dimension here. This line is directly from the analytics.js developer documentation, which was kind of a bear to find. So if you were taking pictures of all this, this is a good one to take a picture of. By replacing the standard page view tracker with this line of code on all non-AMP pages, and this is important, you need to put this on your non-AMP pages, you will now be able to see the client ID of a specific user, one-to-one, both AMP and non-AMP pages on all standard reports. Let me show you what that means. Client ID now is accessible in all reports that allow custom dimensions. It is being passed not only with the page view tracking, but also with any events that were triggered on our AMP pages. And this is pretty damn cool. So let me explain what this means. Each one of these IDs is actually a single user. So I am able to break it down by a single user and say that this person right here clicked on those buttons 9 times. I can break it down by page. I can break it down by dimension. I can break it down by the dynamic values that I'm passing. I can get it down to one-to-one interaction, whether you came in from Google, whether you came in directly, or any of those other methods. I can track it all. And what this means to me as a marketer, and what this means to you, is that pretty much when I sat down and I outlined my key performance indicators that I absolutely had to track, it solved all my problems. Everything that I wanted to do, I could solve either by using the ClientID API, custom event tracking, or dimension pushing. Another neat byproduct of this implementation is once you have implemented the ClientID API and are pushing the ClientID custom dimension, you're able to see whether a user first interacted with an AMP or non-AMP page. Anyone first accessing your content through an AMP page will have a client ID starting with AMP, and anyone accessing your content from a non-AMP page will have something else. And that gives us some pretty cool insights. I can go into my analytics report and say, in general, are people who enter through an AMP page more likely to do what I want them to do or not? I don't know yet, because this is pretty new in our analytics, but we're going to start looking at the information. It's just a neat byproduct. You can see how we've accessed the client ID and sent it along with page view requests as a custom dimension here. By adding a few lines of code to our AMP and non-AMP analytics, we have gotten much more accurate and sophisticated information. Here's a recap of what we have covered in this presentation. First, we embedded the AMP Client ID API to consolidate sessions across AMP and non-AMP content. This is the solution to most of our problems. It solves coming in via Google Organic and seeing all those SKUs and metrics wonky. It solves all those problems. Second is tracking events with dynamic values on AMP pages. So whether your event is a click, or whether your event is a scroll, or visible, or any of those things, you can dynamically pass data in each of those events to get really sophisticated information about what's happening. Third, tracking sending custom dimensions in AMP. And right now, what we're using this one is the dimension we're using is the customer client ID, because that gives us the ability to track one-to-one all the way through our ad cycle. But you can send any dimension you want through there. And fourth is sending Google Analytics Client ID as a custom level dimension on both AMP and non-AMP pages for allowing user level reporting across Google Analytics Report, which I've talked about earlier. So back to the original question, to AMP or not to AMP. While there are some clear limitations of using AMP, and which we've discussed today, where it's a new product, it's still in flux, people are still working on it, and just like many versions that are in their infancy, there's some problems and limitations. However, they are being actively improved upon along the way. And the AMP community and the AMP team has been really great about making sure that anything that we have a problem with, and if you submit an issue or you submit something through Git, it gets addressed relatively quickly, especially if it's a more pressing project. One of the largest challenges in trying to decide whether or not we should pilot and test AMP was tracking a user's interaction with that content across their entire journey accurately. That has been solved in the most part with the use of AMP Client ID API. While implementing this took some development work and debugging, which I was not prepared for, the end result has given us much more confidence in our data and allowed us to see a true picture of our website visitors' behavior. And in fact, requiring myself and my team to go and look at tracking through a lens that's beyond just copying and pasting Google Analytics script allowed us to become even more sophisticated in our tracking and focus more on that aspect and learn more than we originally did. For this particular client that is primarily a mobile audience, AMP has significantly improved their user experience. and our conversion rates have gone through the roof. So there was never really a question in our mind of, we did an initial pilot run, and we knew our numbers were all wonky, but we knew that our conversions were going up. And we knew, especially after lots of the information today, AMP is where we want it to be. For us as a small agency, it forced best practice. It forced us to be better than we were, and our users really enjoyed it. But our main concern was tracking, and that has been resolved. At the end of the day, I believe the AMP project is all about improving the user experience for people interacting with your content online, and I think that's the goal of all of us as marketers. And I don't think we should let analytics be the hindrance between giving our users a better experience online. You can get the right data. You can get accurate data. It takes a little bit of work, and just like most things, a few lines of code. That's all I have today.